I'm really excited to be here. It's great to see everybody. And this is one of my favorite topics to speak about. So you need to have courageous conversations to be successful in your career. Firmly believe that. And I want to start by sharing a story about the first time I had a courageous conversation. That I look like this, so anyone wondering what my natural hair color is, the gig is now up. And I was 15 at the time. And even though I'm smiling in this picture, I wasn't really happy that I have dyslexia. And I was diagnosed with dyslexia probably around 14. And in order to make things a bit easier, I was given what's called an individual educational plan. And that allowed me to have certain modifications in the classroom, such as extra time, and I didn't have to write in Scantrons. I could circle things on the book. Now, the problem was that these modifications were announced loudly in front of the whole class by teachers, and I was the victim of a lot of bullying. It was just a really hard time feeling different at that age, but especially making something so personal to me so vocal. And I remember, the summer right before I was turning a sophomore, and I was thinking about this, and I had the first courageous conversation with myself, which was, is there anything you can do about this? And the answer was yes, there actually is. So I wrote a letter that was published in my newspaper, and this is the letter. And I spoke about my experience and really shared that this wasn't right. Like, teachers shouldn't be making my modifications public. People should be more tolerant. And I was so scared because this was a conversation, again, that I wasn't just having with people I trusted. It was out there. It was there. And what was so neat is that when I got back to school, even though I was scared, I did walk with a different level of confidence because I was able to take some power back, and I was able to have these conversations with my teachers at a different level, and there was clout. When there were meetings about my IEP, I insisted that I be present at them, and that my parents were not to be the only ones there, that if any choices were going on, I wanted to be part of it. And it was really my first, experience of advocacy, and I would say my life really changed as a result of that, and I did get much more respect as a result of it. So, fast forward to today, which I'm going to share, my second story, because I don't believe in giving these workshops and only talking about the technical piece. I always like to share a little bit about myself and how I really utilize this in my life. That I'm a business owner, that I started my own business 3.5 years ago, where I have a private practice, and I focus a lot on people who are going through life transitions. When September hit, I also, I should say on the side, I work for an organization where I counsel teens who are survivors of abuse. And I love doing that job. It gives a lot of meaning to my life. And I've been doing that work for over 5 years. And I learned that the funding for that position was probably not going to exist, within a year. So I hit a crisis, and I said to myself, this crisis allowed me to really look at myself and say, well, what do I want? I'm working a lot. I don't mind working a lot, but I'm working a lot. I'm working 70, 80 hours a week. And I don't want to be doing this forever. What do I want? And I realized I do want to have a business full time. But my conversation I had with myself, again, was, well, what's holding me back? Because we all have things, raise your hand. We all have things we want to do that we say we're going to do, and we have plans of it, but we're just not moving forward with it. So I've been talking for a long time about I want to do this business, but I'm not moving forward with it. So I realized, though, in asking those tough, honest questions, that I didn't have a niche. I didn't have a specialty, that I'm good at what I do, but to have a business and to feel really great about it, I really need a specialty. So what I utilized is, again, because I have an experience in working with people who learn things differently, I decided that educational consulting firms, places that you go to if you want to get into a school of your choice, that they'll help you write essays to get into your school. And I realized that these places have no social workers on staff. They have no clinicians. So when you have an experience of wanting to get into, like when I wrote my essay to get into my MSW school, I shared some personal things, as I'm sure you did, getting into school. What happens if you share personal things and then after you have no one as a therapist to be able to help you pick those pieces up? You know, it could be a problem. It could affect your ability to stay in school. It could affect a lot of things. So I pitched myself with this idea, and I have clients now. I have firms I work with, but I have clients who I Skype with. I have clients, you know, who are international that I work with. And I was able to really expand my business, that now I have an office in not only in Williamsburg, but in Union Square. And I've hired people to help me out with my business too. So it was really great, but like again, it was that courageous conversation of, well, you're nervous, Aimee. What are you nervous about? Like, you might be nervous for a very valid reason. Let's go there, let's look at it. Let's see if we could fill in the gaps. So if I didn't have that and I either jumped into it, right, I would have struggled. And if I never asked myself that question, I would have always been living in that world of like, someday I'll do this. So again, you need to have these courageous conversations to be successful in your career. So what I want to do now is define what a courageous conversation is. It scares you. It has to be really scary, right? If it's something that's not scary to you, it's not a courageous conversation. It's a philosophical conversation. You know, it is interesting, but those questions I'd ask myself of like, what are you missing? Like, why can't you do this? It's a scary conversation. Publishing a letter in, you know, the newspaper when I was 15 about being bullied about my learning disability, that was scary. It was really scary. It was a very scary conversation. So it has to scare you. It also has to be what I refer to as a coming out conversation, where you're saying something you've never said before. Having the same fight over and over again with your boss, with your spouse, that's not a courageous conversation. You want to say something new. Like saying, I'm tired of being bullied, but doing it in a very public way in front of a newspaper. That's a courageous conversation. Being able to say, okay, what am I missing here? And then going and understanding the market well enough to know how I could be of service, and calling up educational consulting firms and saying, hey, I could provide something for you, something you haven't even thought of, something new, it's something different. Scary, but that's a courageous conversation. And there's two different types of these courageous conversations. There's the internal ones, the ones we say to ourselves, right? Like, I'm not happy in the marriage I'm in. That's an internal conversation. I'm not happy in my job. I don't know if I could do this. I don't know if I want to work these amount of hours. All of that's internal. And external is like what you have with others. So you bring it to others too. So these conversations are, you know, really, really important to have. And I would say, regardless of if you want to be an entrepreneur or not, so important to have. And it's been argued before that courage is the key to great leadership. And I absolutely believe that there's something about, you know, leaders that we really respect, that they're able to say what they don't want to say, but also take what they get, right? Like, that's a conversation. It's not a monologue. A conversation is saying, I'm not happy, and then hearing what comes back at you, right? Like, we need to be able to do that, because then it's a dialogue. It's an interchange of information. So it's very important to be able to have this. And when I was looking for some like statistics, because I'm really big and I love like looking at statistics about these things, and what I found is that there's 4 types of courage that are seen the most in a work office place. The first one is standing up to authority. That when there was a study done at University of Boulder, and what was found is the number 1 type of courage that is reported at work is when you stand up to authority. When you say, you know what, I know that that policies are changing, but it doesn't work that we're not being paid for our lunches anymore. That doesn't work. Or saying, I know that we need to work round the clock on this deal, but I still need to go to this wedding that I put in time for 6 months ago. Like standing up to authority, that's the one that people experience the most. Second one is admitting to a mistake. And this is how I say you admit to a mistake. You state the facts. I apologize. This is what I did. And you just state the facts, and then you let people say what they need to say. So often, people don't admit to a mistake, but they admit to excuses on why the mistake happened. Right? Yeah. Right? It takes courage just to say, no, I did this. I messed up. I'm interested in repairing it. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say, even though I'm scared. Right? The third one is protecting those in need. So protecting other colleagues, right, by saying, they're being mistreated, or saying something about clients, they're not getting the best service possible. And the last one is taking a stand on a problem that has no clear solution. I see this happening right now at the organization that I was a part of for so many years, where funding is in jeopardy, and people are throwing out all different types of solutions, and we don't know if any of them will work. But people feel very strongly about those solutions. But taking a stand, as opposed to what I like to refer to as like trauma bonding, people getting together and getting really upset about something, but not having any clear solution. It takes a lot of courage to say, okay, let's try this. Let's go for it. Let's try it. So those are the 4 types that happen most at work. Now, I don't think we could really talk about courage without talking about vulnerability. And Brené Brown, who's also a social worker, and she's one of my most favorite, ones, has this great quote that vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage. And I believe that, so much. And in order to be vulnerable, you have to be able to relate well with other people. You have to have connections with other people. In order to be courageous, you need to be able to relate again to other people, because when you share news and you're self-disclosing and you're being vulnerable, it helps so much when you have strong relationships with people. And it's interesting, I found that, some other statistics, that if you compare star performers at work with average performers, and this is all in like senior levels of leadership, that 90% of the difference between people who are star performers versus average performers were due to emotional intelligence factors. That people who have at least one close friend at work were 7 times more likely to be engaged. People without a close friend at work had only a 1 in 12 chance of being engaged. And 70% of jobs come through a personal contact, through networking. So again, people, when you are able to bond together, when you're able to be vulnerable with one another, your chances of succeeding when you have these conversations go so much further. That I always say, at a new job, find an ally. Find somebody, like right away. Like, that's your job. It makes things so much easier. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how do you have these conversations. That first I want to discuss, though, a little bit about what gets in the way of us having these conversations. So we want to be liked. Like, this is one thing I found when I did my own research. That this was the number one. We want to be liked. We're going to say some stuff that people may not like us after we say it. We're scared of rejection. We're afraid that if we say it, it won't make a difference. We're going to say this like really, intense emotional thing, and then it's not going to make a difference. And we don't want to make someone else uncomfortable. So I could see this, when I was afraid of really starting my own business. I was scared that, what if it doesn't make a difference? What if I put in all this time and money and, I don't succeed? It won't make a difference. It was very frightening. What if other people reject me? And all of this stuff comes up. but it got to a point where I needed to choose something bigger than my fears in order to take that risk. So before we talk about what we do, I want to mention what you shouldn't do when we have these conversations. So we'll go over the pitfalls first before we go over the formula. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to blow up in anger. And I think this happens a lot. Something will happen and we'll react. We don't think clearly when we're really angry or we're really anxious. That we actually don't have the capacity to remember things on the same level, which is why it's always recommended if you're going to a scary doctor appointment, bring someone with you, because you may not be able to hear everything so accurately when you're so scared and when you have a heightened sense of emotion. That's why, again, we need people in our life, especially when we're feeling anxious or angry, because we tend to block things out and we react. So that's why it's so important when you're feeling angry, do not send that email. Do not say we're going to discuss it. Give yourself a timeout. Do not discuss things when you're angry and you're like feeling that adrenaline. Take that energy and do something else. If you could work out, that I find to be the best thing, to just like get it out, get that energy out in some way. So you don't want to have a one-sided monologue either. And I see this in emails a lot. You know, how many people have gotten those long emails before telling them off in some way? Or like a terrible email, long email that just saying all these things that you did wrong. Doesn't work. That's not a conversation. We're talking about a conversation. When we're having a conversation, it's two sides. So quite often, I'll say something and I'll ask someone, did that make sense? Or what are you thinking right now? That's a conversation, like that's a dialogue between both of us. And I want to always make sure I hear what is going on for them. If it's a really important conversation, like the ones we're discussing, I'll also set up a time for us to regroup. We just discussed a lot. This was intense. Or this was a lot of information. Can we touch base tomorrow at 12 just for like 10 minutes just to see if anything else came up? That makes a difference, but you know, no long text messages, no long emails, no long going on and on and on, which sounds funny because I'm going on and on and on up here. But yes, it's, you know, a conversation is not that. So you don't, and this is hard too, if you can, try not to make the other person wrong, even if they are. Try not to judge them, even if the judgments are going everywhere. Which is why it's so important to be able to calm down and not react in anger, because then the judgments are going to take over. But stating the facts always makes it so much easier. The facts look like this. We begin work at 9 o'clock. You've been coming in at 9:30 every day. It doesn't work for the productivity of the team. Just the facts. We could think about this in many ways. You forgot my birthday this year and it hurt my feelings. Like we want to look at what are the facts, right? Not accusatory, not you did this, or let's look at the facts. And people have a much easier time being able to hear you when you relate to just the facts of what happened. And it gives an openness for them to be vulnerable. And that's what you really want in a conversation. In you being vulnerable, you want the opportunity for the other person to also be vulnerable. So you don't want to lie. You don't want to and we lie in different ways, right? We'll lie and be like, I was a little upset the other day. We minimize things. Or I was so angry I couldn't get out of bed all day. Or so upset. Okay, we don't want to add the drama into this. We don't want to lie. We don't want to over-dramatize things. Again, the purpose isn't to make the other one feel bad. The purpose is to have a dialogue and have a commitment to resolving conflicts. And again, I'm not saying that in doing these steps you're going to have a smooth outcome every time, but this is about you feeling good about the job that you've done. This is about being able to employ steps that work, So you don't want to do that. And the last one is speak for yourself. Do not speak for 10 other people. Do not say, not only do I feel this way, but Joe, Jane, Sue, everyone else feels this way too. No. Let them have their own conversations. Only speak for yourself. And this is the challenge I always say in workplace situations, and again, I'm a therapist, so I see things through a therapeutic lens, but it brings up sibling issues, I find. So it's like a very similar dynamic that you see sibling issues all the time at the workplace. How many people, raise your hand if you could see that, right? Like, you could see like the dinner table, you could see sibling rivalry, you could see who is like, you know, the rebellious one, the troublemaker, the favorite one. We see all of that. You want to speak for yourself. Again, leaders encourage others to be able to have their own leadership skills. So that's what you do. You want to really encourage people to speak to yourself. All right, so here's what you do. Okay, we discussed what didn't work. You're going to set aside some time to figure it out. Okay, so when I learned that the funding for this job was in jeopardy, I said, okay, I need to go home this weekend. I need to be able to figure out how many clients I need in order to really feel comfortable going off on my own. I needed to set aside time to really figure it out. It wasn't like, am I ready, am I not? Does it feel good, doesn't it? It's like, no. Let me set some time aside to really figure it out. Then be clear on what goal you have. Okay? So what is your goal? It might be to get an answer. It might be to get facts. It may be something that's not realistic for them to say, I'm sorry. But at least know what that goal is, right? Because then you're going in with very clear expectations. Ask yourself the tough questions. This is what's really important here. You need to ask yourself the really tough questions. When I counsel people around career, I ask them sometimes, how hard are you willing to work? It's a tough question. People get offended. They don't like that question. But it's an honest one. How much money do you need to survive, right? What type of boss will you just not be able to tolerate? There's nothing wrong with that, but it's important to ask yourself those tough questions. But then you want to admit the truth. So you're going to ask those questions, and then you're going to answer them. And the last one I have, clean up your mess with compassion. And what I mean by that is when we have these tough conversations, we need to take responsibility in some way. And it's not blaming ourselves. For me, it was a matter of, I haven't really been as focused on finances as I should have been all these years. And now I'm in a place that I'm really worried. If I don't make a certain amount, this could be a problem. So I need to just make some new promises, and I need to set up some structures that can help me with that. And that will make a big difference, right? When I was 14, I remember saying to teachers, 15 rather, when I went back to school that, I'm sorry I never shared how when you said those modifications publicly, how it hurt me. I should have said something. I didn't. If it happens again, I'll say something. But we always want to look for where we could take responsibility because, again, it's a dialogue. If we want other people to be able to be vulnerable, we want to also give them the opportunity to see us doing so as well. That modeling has been shown to be the most effective form of teaching. So we're really modeling for other people how they can really have these conversations. And I don't know if you've had this experience of speaking to someone or working with someone who's so angry, but in you staying calm and centered, they slowly matched you. And that's what can happen. When you stand your ground and you have a formula, it certainly helps. In any case, here is my contact information. I do have some business cards in the back, and I would love to open this up if anyone has any further questions, but it's really been a pleasure being here with you tonight, and thank you for your participation.